Hello and welcome to yet another gorgeous sunny day in London, and today n=36. I'm following up from the last talk, which was about Tibet, and I probably talked too long, sorry about Tibet, and probably confused people. But today I'm going to confuse people even more by moving on from Tibet and talking about Rio. So Tibet, as you heard yesterday, is all about multi-binding. It's about combining things using pluses, etc., using format, using if, using function style value converters, and also adding MvvmCross into the XAML, binding into the XAML. So, you know, Tibet is all about view size stuff. And Tibet binding is gorgeous, and it's got to be used carefully because, you know, you can do bad as well as good using it. But Rio is something different. Rio is, and let me just reformat my highly sophisticated presentation technique. So Rio is all about changing view models, and it's about, you know, just writing view models in a different way. And it's particularly inspired really by things like knockout in JavaScript, where, you know, they've taken MVVM and they've changed it. They've used it in a JavaScripty way. And for me, MVVM and data binding hasn't really changed in the C# world since like 2005, and perhaps even before then. So Rio is kind of a first go at trying to evolve the view model side of things. So enough talking, let's move into it. And what I'm going to do is this sample here is the same sample as we used in Tibet. It's just frozen before we added all of that multi-binding stuff. So it's just got a view model with kind of, you know, this person form in there. And you can see the view model is quite lengthy here. It's got all these observable collections and things, and it's, you know, it's just lengthy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that view model and I'm going to add a plugin. So let's just do this. And so I'm going to add from online MvvmCross, and it's the field binding plugin that I want to add. So it's at the top of the list there. I'm going to add it in 309. And what you should be able to see is that when we add it to our core project, then it's just, you know, a little DLL that gets added. And what we can then do as a result of that is all of these properties, which are all these auto properties, which aren't used in any kind of cunning way, we can just replace them, if we need to, with fields. So instead of having the a get set property like that, what we can do is we can replace it with a field. But because we still want to support changeability, what we do is we wrap it in a very small interface called iNotifyChanged, and we import that from our field plugin. And so it's called fillName, and we initialize it using a notifyChanged class, which we've got an abbreviation for, NC. Let me just zoom in a bit here so you can see it. And so that, and it wasn't field name, it was first name. That first name replaces all of this kind of gunk that we had for first name before. And I'm going to do the same for last name. Yeah. And you can see, you know, it's not a property, it is just a field. For extra safety, to make sure no one ever actually, you know, changes the holder for this field, we can put read only in as well, which means you'll only ever get one of them. We can also, you know, shorten this title response down, so let's do that. So in fact, for the title response, we can actually have that as a public field and just make it read only, because that's just a static list of titles. So let's just get rid of that property accessor for a private variable. We'll just use the field itself there. For title, that's another one of these guys, so let's just pull it in as an iNotifyChanged of title response. So this is going to be title response of title. New. And by the end of this, hopefully, what have I done wrong? It's an INC. By the end of this, hopefully you'll see that we start getting down to a much smaller class. So there's nothing functionally that's changing here, but there is an awful lot of you know, syntax changes that are happening. If you don't like these syntax changes, by all means, you know, switch away now. Say, you know, this is madness. I don't like using fields. I like using properties. There are very good reasons why we've always had properties. But what you'll now see is that if we come down, we do get a few syntax errors, and that's basically because we've wrapped these fields here, you know, in this iNotifyChanged. And what you do is now, in order to actually get the value or to set the value, you just use the .value property on these things. So what you can do is just use these things, .value, whoops, .value, .value, and again you can set the values here. So hopefully you can see there that we have, you know, changed our thing. We've got an observable collection at the bottom. That as well can be wrapped. In fact, because that's a read-only thing, we could wrap it very straightforwardly by just declaring the field public read-only, because we never intend to change this guy, so we don't need to wrap it in iNotifyChanged. So we'll just have a field public read-only people. And now we should, if I just take a look at it, we should have pulled this class down by quite a lot in terms of lines of code. I didn't take a look before, but now what you can see is, you know, we can pull these guys into a much smaller area of the class. That is now a much shorter class in terms of its declaration. Things like this before, they were 5 lines each, they're now 1 line each. So hopefully, let me just rearrange it a little bit more. Let me just pull these guys up so we can see it all in one place. Your view model now hopefully will be pulled down into you know, much less lines, which means you can see it as a programmer. You can just see what's going on a lot quicker. You may not particularly, you know, like that. You may prefer having more lines, in which case don't use field binding, don't use this Rio. But hopefully that kind of just, you know, is okay to you. So having done that, if you then want to use this view model inside, for example, Droid, then what you can do is you can go to the Droid project, and just as you've just done, you can go to MvvmCross and field, and you have to add it to each of the client projects. So we're going to do that. So once we've done that, then our view, without changing at all, should carry on working. So if we go to debug start new on Droid, then emulator permitting, it should kick in and work just as it was working before we made these field changes. So we've got, you know, our list of titles. You can type in Bob. Whoops, no I can't. My keyboard is also very stretched here, unfortunately. So it's going to be first name E and last name C. I'm going to accept the terms. I'll hide the keyboard. I'll hit add, and you can see Dr. EECC has been added. If I add another one, then hopefully you'll see that, you know, Dr. RRR XXX is also going to be added. Oh, it's Mrs. Sorry, did I choose the wrong one? So you can see that the data binding is working there. It's two-way, but now it's just going through these guys inside the view model. And iNotifyChanged itself, let me see if I can pull that up. INC is just a wrapper for iNotifyChanged. And can I go to the metadata on this? Let me see if I can get to the metadata from the main view. Navigate to metadata view. So iNotifyChanged is a very simple interface, and if I can pull it up, metadata view, then all it's really got in it is a new value, and it's got a method that allows you to an event that allows you to see when that value changes, so changed, and it also has a hint about value type. So that's all that is in iNotifyChanged. Even though it's called iNotifyChanged, it's still part of the MvvmCross namespace at the moment. Perhaps that might change in the future. Perhaps somebody else will come along with a more standardized one. But that is what iNotifyChanged is. So if you wanted to implement your own notifyChanged object, perhaps, you know, for something like a computed observable or something like that, you could do it. You could really implement this interface really fast without any worries about doing that at all. You know, it's such a small interface. You know how it works. Obviously, just as with the main MvvmCross interfaces, you kind of expect it to be called on the UI thread. So be a bit cautious about where you call it. But other than that, you know, that's as the same as iNotify property changed. But other than that, it's the same type of interface, so it should just work. Okay, so that shows you it working in Droid. Let me quickly show you that you can also use the same interface in Touch. So we're going to set this as the startup project. going to switch to iPhone Simulator. Obviously we have to at the moment do manage NuGet, and what we'll do again is we need to add in this field plugin. Yeah, so as with all the interfaces, you have to add that, all these plugins, you have to add them to the UI projects. Otherwise they won't come through with the native implementations for them. So let's just pull this in. It's going to run up. And what I can then do is I can show you that hopefully running on the Mac. So to do that, let me pull up type-vnc and connect. You can see it compiling away in the background. And so what we need is a password and then another one. And what we've got is good. We've got our user interface, so we can choose Doctor, and we can choose a name like EEE, like we did before. It's auto corrected it, and we can also change Dr. Weir Dread is the name. You can accept the terms and conditions, hit add, and you can see that Weir has been added. If you then wanted to add a Mr., and this is Mr. Life Changing. You can add him and he'll come up as life in this list down here. Is there a tap? So yeah, those are the two people who've been added. So that's the code just working. No real other changes made to get iNotify changed working in Touch. If you want to use, finally just to look at, if you want to use it within XAML, then within XAML, this project here is pre-Rio, pre-Tibet. So we haven't set up any Windows binding. So if you want to use the Tibet view models, these Rio view models, these iNotify change view models in XAML, then you will have to switch to our binding because there's no way of extending Windows binding to know about fields. So what you have to do is you have to switch to our binding, just as we did in Tibet, and you then have to add the field binding. So let me just add that in. And once you've done that, in this setup there's a small little override you have to add to initialize last chance, and that small override is to create that builder. If you watch the last N+1 you'll know about this builder. It's a new MVX Windows binding builder, and you call builder.doRegistration. And then once you've done that, you should just be able to go and you should be able to run this. And I believe, oh hang on, we haven't changed our bindings. So in first view, we do then have to change our bindings across to this other format. So let's just do it. So our bindings, which are to fields, you can see them all here, these items, sources and things. These have to change. So we have to use the MVX syntax. So that's MVX bi.nd. I had it there briefly that it wanted to pull it in, equals, so let resharp pull it in, and that's item source is titles, and then the other one is selected item is title, and get rid of the other binding. And then we just do that all the way down these objects. So everything here that's bound using the Windows curly brace binding has to change to our Tibet binding format, if you like. So we're changing the text binding on this text box to be first name. We'll change the text binding on this one to be last name. The is checked on here is going to be to accepted. Let's just do that. We're not changing the command at the moment, so I'll just leave that. Although you could easily change it if you wanted to. To command is going to add command. Let's just do it. Okay, so that's that binding switched over, and then here finally we have, item source and people. So let's just do that. One thing in the clipboard. So with those changed across to the kind of Tibet binding style, this can now take advantage, I hope, of the iNotify change. So let's run it up and see. And so now, unless I made a mistake, we should be able to select a Mrs. Humphrey. Mrs. Humphrey's a good name. Mrs. Humphrey Bogart. Sorry, it's very disrespectful. Let me turn that to Mr. Humphrey Bogart. Accept on his behalf and do that, and you can see all of the binding working. Dr. Oops, something's going wrong with my fan in the background. Dr. Fred. I'm not going to call him a Flintstone. That's not a doctor's name. Dr. Fred Cutter. Cutter's a brilliant name for a doctor. So here, accepted, and you can see all of the binding just working. So that's cool, and that's the first stage of Rio binding demonstrated. So in that stage, all we've done, just to show you, is we've taken, oops, wrong place, is we've taken our view models, and where previously we had lines which looked a bit like, let me just show you, they looked a bit like PMDX string, and it was a first name. Where previously we had these, 5 lines of code, we've now just pulled that down to a property. There are differences there. Obviously, there's an opportunity to hook in other code here, but overall, if it's just a simple view model with just a few things that are changing, then this new syntax, makes it more succinct for the programmer. So it just makes it a bit nicer. And it really is, it's quite similar to the JavaScript, whereas if you've used knockout, then you would have a view model dot property equals observable. Yeah, so equals a new observable, and that's the way that you put it together. So that's all we're doing here is our notify changed. It's a bit like an observable. If you don't like these shortcuts of INC, then you can use the full iNotify changed and notify changed here. But overall, it's more useful, I find, to just use NC and INC, and you might even find yourself talking about inks and nooks. So that's part of it, and you can see we've managed to produce things down a little bit more. But there's also still a little bit ugliness here, and that's that this add command is still a little bit over verbose for what we really want here, because what people might want to do instead is they might just want to have a method called add, or do add or something. Let's call it add for now. So you might want to just have a method called add, and you might want to use that instead of the add command. So let's just pull that down, and instead of having an MVX command, let's just have an add implementation. And what you can do in that add implementation then is just use the same code, and that makes the view model look even more like a normal C# class. However, obviously at the moment you can't use add directly in your view models, because your view models, everything in your view model kind of expects to bind to a command. So it's not, without a little bit of a change, possible just to change that add command to add and then have it work. However, good news is it is possible if you add another plugin, and this plugin only needs adding to the UI projects, doesn't need adding any changes to the core. You can add it to the core if you want to, but there's no advantage in doing it. And this is called the method plugin. So let's just see, method binding, hopefully it'll come back. So there is a method binding plugin. If you install it into your UI projects, then after you run it up, you should discover that add carries on working, but is now using, our add method, rather than worrying about a command. Under the covers, just while it builds up, I can tell you that it does create a command. But that command is just magically created as a wrapper around your add functionality, and so it just eases your load for actually. So this is Doctor, and I still haven't got a keyboard, so it's going to be a Doctor DXB CBH, and if we hit add, you can see the add is working. So that functionality is still tied together. Let me just show you that the same functionality will work on touch. If I were to build up touch, actually, I think with touch there will be one change that we require. So if I were now to set this as the startup, and to do a build, then this should now fail because it's still got an add command in there. So it's failing on, it's got 3 errors it says, but it's failing in particular on this binding here to add command, because obviously we've removed the add command. So you can't at the moment use a binding like that because we haven't written the expression parsing to allow you to talk to vmadd. But what you can do in terms of binding is you can bind to a string, which is add, and that will allow you to bind to that add method. And once you do that, then hopefully if we have pulled in the method binding, install, then you should still be able to run this up. So if we do debug, let me just prove that it's actually doing live. Let me change the add dot text color is there. Tint color will do, and we'll set that equal to UI color dot, is there a purple? That sounds brilliant. So just to prove that it's a live demo, we've changed the button color. So if we run that up, that should go across and compile to the iOS box. And when it compiles there, we should hopefully see that the new add binding is working. So we hook it up, and obviously we need to select a title, and this is going to be Mr. Jeremy, and Droid Awesomeness is his name. He knows who he is inside Xamarin. And if we hit add, you can see Jeremy is added to the list. So that functionality is carried on working, and you can see we have, just replaced the add command with the add. I don't know whether we'll actually add that syntax into the expression parser. Probably, but for now you do have to use that add as the statement. So that's done in Touch. Let's finally also show you it working in a Windows project in XAML. And so to convert this one across, what we have to do is we would have to find the add command, and we will just bind it. So instead of binding to add command, we're going to bind to that add method. Obviously, again, we have to pull in the method binding. We only have to do this once, but it's once it's done. So pull in method binding, pull it in, and once you've done that, then you should be able to run this up, and it should carry on working, but now use that method. So apologies, this is called N36 Tibet. It's nothing to do with Tibet. I'll have to change that. It's called N36 Rio. But now you should see if it's a Doctor Who, and his last name is also Who, Doctor Who. We'll accept on his behalf, and you can see Doctor Who's come through, and I don't need to repeat this. It's just obvious now. Mrs. Life Changing, wife of Mr. Life Changing from earlier. So those are our changes. That is Rio binding. So there are 2 plugins involved. One of them is called field binding. One of them is called method binding. They are definitely to be considered prototype. I'd say, probably better than a prototype. They're alpha stage bindings at the moment. They work pretty well. They also enable you, for example, to bind to other fields. So at last you can actually bind to things like length. Yeah, on a field. So we can actually show you. That's not going to work very well. Let me bind another text block here. And this text block I will show the combined length of first name, last name, and a space. And so we combine that now without a value converter. So what we can do is in this text block we will show last name.length plus first name.length plus 1, and what this will be using is it will be using the length field that is on the string object. Yeah, and you've never been able to bind to that before. You've always had to use some sort of value converter to do that. But you can see just using this combination of Rio and Tibet binding, that should now come through. So I can't actually see it there. What have I done wrong? So there it is come through. Obviously to start with it was null just because there were some nulls in there, sorry about that. But as soon as you start adding it in there, you can see these things have come through. So that's it. If you wanted to avoid those nulls initially, then obviously you could, in your view model, have set default values for these guys. So you could have set, either empty strings, or you could have set, first name and last name by default. But it was just because they were null initially that this store option didn't show the length of 1 to start with. Or is it? Maybe there is a bug there. I'd have to check that. What have I done wrong? Maybe it's a... I'd have to check why that didn't show initially. I'm not sure why that didn't show until I had both first name and last name showing. Let me just take a look. So it shows there. I'll have to check. Oh, I know what it is. It's just that I didn't rebuild. Hang on. Let's prove that to myself. It's because I'm in a weird configuration. I'm in iPhone Simulator, and in iPhone Simulator none of these are actually selected to build. So let me just prove that if I rebuild it, then you will see a 1 from the start. So there's your 1. So that is the combination of Rio alongside Tibet shown. And I hope that kind of gives you ideas about what you can do to change bindings and to experiment and to do anything else you'd like to do. As I say, most of this is pretty new functionality, but it's pretty interesting functionality. Have a play. Have a think about what you'd like to change in binding. The source code is all up on GitHub, and it's actually pretty small as well. If I actually show you what something like field binding is, then field binding is not that many classes, it's not that many lines of code. So if you have an idea about how you would like to change field binding, bind to some other type of object, you can take a look at this code and you can do it. And method binding is even smaller in terms of being a plugin. And it is a little bit complicated the way it has to deal with the parse tokens, but it's not a great amount of functionality that's included in method binding to get it working. So if you have an idea about how you'd like to change it, then by all means write an alternative plugin and just plug it in and see if you could find a way of binding some other type of object. That's it from me. I will stop talking now and let you go and play with these things. I hope that's at least given you a beginning insight into Rio binding, and that on top of Tibet binding from yesterday, it's kind of opening up the ideas about what you can actually do within data binding. As I say, I think data binding's kind of been fixed since 2005, and maybe now is an opportunity to change it in various ways. So cool. Obviously some things may get thrown away as well, but it's an interesting first step. Cool, that's enough from me, and yeah, good luck with whatever you play with. I'm going to go out and play in the sun.